Hello and welcome to Newsclick. Today we have with us Dr. Satyajit Rath, and we'll be discussing some of the issues that have hit the news recently thanks to some journalistic reporting, some technical papers. This concerns what is good for us to eat, whether eggs are good for us, whether fats, meat products are really as bad as they've been painted, are sugars the key problem. So what is it really that we should do as far as diet is concerned? And some of this relates to the controversies that have now come up. Satyajit, there have been some papers, Professor Lustig talking about what is Arcel Keys' major findings, supposedly driving this whole field of diet in one direction. Professor Yudnik, who was virtually excommunicated in the 70s for whatever reasons, who apparently had the thesis that sugars were the main culprit in what is now regarded as an epidemic of obesity, type 2 diabetes. Of course, this is also there now in quite large numbers in India. Do you think there is something which is true in this, that you had some skewing of the field in one direction and now coming back, or do you think this is a manufactured controversy?
I'm going to sit very uncomfortably on the fence in a variety of directions on this one. So, the answer to the first question, is there a reordering of priorities that's been going on for a while? And the answer is yes, there has been. We have been inclined to thinking of fats as a primary culprit. We are now swinging away from fats and trying to identify sugars, particularly fructose, but sugars in general, simple sugars in general, as a primary culprit.
When you say fructose, what does it mean in terms of being a sugar? How much is it used? How do we actually consume fructose?
Well, fructose is called fructose because it's found in fruits, but it's a simple sugar. It's not as simple as glucose, but it is still a simple sugar, exactly the same way that sucrose is a simple sugar found in sugar. You can get energy from all of these. The pathways, the biochemical pathways by which we derive energy from all of these are a little bit different, and those differences have been to some extent implicated in how our bodies respond differently to large amounts of fructose versus large amounts of sucrose versus perhaps large amounts of glucose. Of course, we also make glucose from complex carbohydrates, much larger molecules of polysaccharides, as they say, and the biochemical pathways from which we derive sugars from those are yet another area of investigation.
So fructose has been implicated more seriously, as it were, than the other sugars, and this has made the field sort of come back, that there is a possibility sugars are also implicated in a large way in some of these issues. It's not just fats in our diets or what is to be called saturated fats in our diet.
Let me complicate this a little bit. When we talk about what we eat and what the consequences are in terms of obesity, in terms of type 2 or insulin resistant or adult onset diabetes, or a whole slew of cardiovascular diseases that lead to either strokes or heart attacks. In all of these, when we talk about the problems of nutrition, we tend to think about nutrients as having a nutritional effect on the body, a metabolic effect on the body. The major difference that the past couple of decades have certainly made to this entire debate is the fact that we have realized that it's not as simple as that. That what we have so far called, when I was a student, certainly were called metabolic diseases, and were either implicitly or explicitly identified as not being related to inflammation, have now been recognized as having a very strong input from the inflammatory processes in the body. It's just that we've taken time to work that out, to acknowledge it. We still don't understand it well, but to acknowledge it.
A quick question here. Explain to us, what is it when you say metabolic diseases? What are the kinds of diseases we are talking about?
So, as I said, we're talking about we eat more than we spend. This, despite all recent controversies, I suspect still remains true. We put on weight. Whether all of us put on weight at exactly the same rate or not, not. And those pathways are therefore clearly modified by other circumstances. That's obesity eventually. We have steady accumulation of what are called fatty deposits under the lining of our blood vessels. That's called atherosclerosis, that leads to narrowing, to roughening, to clotting, and therefore it gives us heart attacks, it gives us brain strokes. That used to be called a metabolic disease. It's no longer, clearly no longer called that. Our bodies become less and less able to remove sugar and use it from circulation, and therefore our blood sugar levels go up because our tissues become insulin resistant. Insulin allows our tissues to take up sugar, and if our tissues are insulin resistant, then there is no uptake of sugar. Sugar accumulates in circulation. That has its own consequences. We call that, as I said, type 2 or insulin resistant diabetes. All of these form the great morass of what used to be called age-related metabolic diseases.
Now you're saying inflammation is found to be another part of the problem, and we have not still identified for our audience what is inflammation in this sense.
So one reason why we didn't perhaps quite see inflammation as playing a role is we are used to inflammation as a local manifestation.
When you get an injury,
there is redness, there is swelling, there is pain. There are classic markers of what inflammation is. You take some anti-inflammatory drugs, and for most people, you can see the symptoms subside. And in these diseases, typically, there is no localized inflammation, and that may have been one reason why perhaps we didn't quite see it coming. So what do I mean by inflammation? Well, the same chemical compounds that bring about the localized changes, many of them are present throughout the body, and because they're present throughout the body, you refer to them as systemic, meaning present in the entire system. And it is the systemic inflammation that seems to be playing a clear and yet not terribly well understood role in what we used to call metabolic disorders and metabolic diseases.
So essentially the field has developed in a direction now that we see far more complexities in the simple sugar causing problem or fat causing problem, just simple plus minus of the energy we take in the body causing a problem. So we're really looking at really more complex interplay of different factors, and would that be the reason that we are sort of understanding less than what we did appear to understand earlier, therefore not giving simplistic solutions?
Yes, we are indeed in that somewhat unsatisfactory situation. We have understood much more complexity that's made us much less certain. And as you said, on the one hand, we've stopped thinking about nutrients as having their effects on body and diseases purely through nutritional metabolic pathways, but also through altering inflammatory pathways on the one hand. And that complicates matters to the point that simple predictions are not easy. That's not to say that they're not made easy in public discourse, but that's a different argument. Similarly, we've also begun to see that all bodies are not the same in responding to nutritional stimulation, to inflammatory stimulation, to fat in general. And there are a large number of environmental and related stimuli that we've begun to understand reshape our responses.
So essentially, no simple solutions, but we can go away from the absolutes, don't do this or do that, to some simple maxims we still need to follow. Don't eat too much. Don't have too much of sugar or too much of fat. Have a balanced diet, which is all, of course, were being said. But do you see that the policy prescriptions that came out of the earlier nutritional debates of the 70s, which really was Professor Yudnik in Britain, who argued that it was really sugar which was deadly, against Arcel Keys, who argued that it was saturated fat which is the main cause. And Yudnik was virtually excommunicated from the university system. He was denied access to his lab, virtually stopped being called in different places. And Arcel Keys really, in some sense, he and his followers ruled the roost. But more importantly, it changed the way the industry as well as the regulatory systems behaved, and as a consequence, this became the received wisdom all over the world. I have my dietitian telling me exactly what you say shouldn't have been said.
So the answer is yes, and again let me complicate this further. The complication is not simply a matter of scientists, epidemiologists, nutritionists doing some pure work that is then taken by society, by industry, by the state in direction X, Y, or Z. It's also that the scientists who are doing this work are already sociocultural beings. They have their preferences, their prejudices, their positions, their connections, which shape how and what they will think. Now, this is not to say that reasonably and soundly and rigorously collected data are without value. Of course not. That's the only way we have of dealing with the world. Yet, it is not as though we as society have somehow corrupted some pure knowledge that science gave us. We need to keep that in mind. That said, really, at the individual level, we've always said what you said. Exercise, don't just lie around, eat in moderation, eat as diverse a diet as possible, take care of your micronutrients because those are the ones easiest to miss because they are micro. Don't stress yourself. These are all common sense things, or what have come to be common sense things, that at the individual level, physicians have advised people for a very long time. So, what's the problem? And in a sense, if you think about it, the problem comes one step at a time. When you say these things, people say, yes, but exactly how much? And in a perfectly well-meaning sense, groups of physicians will put out an authorized set of guidelines that say, for each dietary component, somewhere around this much. These are guesstimates, of course they are. But once they are out there, the term authorized valorizes them perhaps beyond what they should be valorized at. And this becomes relevant in two critical directions. One, the regulatory systems of the state begin to treat them as scriptures. It's in the nature of regulation to treat numbers as binary decision makers. If you are up to here, you're okay. If you are beyond that, you're in criminal territory. There are no gray zones. And once that happens, you have an entire sector of our society beginning to game these binary decision makers because their profit depends on precisely where they're placed.
When you talk about the players, you're really talking about large industry associations, companies, and so on. Sugar-based industries, Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola, and so on.
The meat industry associations, the industrial farming associations, you name it.
Satyajit, you would like to put us to the test of deciding for ourselves. I don't think that makes us very comfortable. But if that's the way we have to go as a society, that's the way we have to go. Thank you very much to be with us and throw us into further confusion than we already were regarding what is already a very controversial and a complex field. Thank you very much.